Hello.
Hey, Zach.
Hello. Hello.
Okay, so just brief introductions here. I'm going to start off with Deb Morgan. Deb Morgan is a licensed clinical social worker with over 27 years of experience. She is based here in Rye, New York, and operates a private practice specializing in addiction, substance abuse disorders, and for individuals and for families. Deb earned her bachelor's degree from Marist before earning an advanced master's degree from Adelphi, concentrating in mental health, and chemical dependency. She considers it an honor and a privilege to support her clients and their families on their journey toward sobriety and wellness, emphasizing compassion and empathy while offering effective care. In the center, I have our executive director, Laura Sorti, who is also a licensed clinical social worker. She is the head of our team here in Westchester, and I'm sure you'll get to know her a little better as we proceed through the evening. And then we have our moderator, Zach Clark, who is our CEO and founder. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Zach.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so happy to be here. You have no idea. I'm so happy we're going to hear from Deb and Laura. I told this story last time, but I tell it pretty much every time that I'm with people that are smarter than me. One of the best things my dad ever taught me was to hire people that are smarter than you, because then you just look smarter and do better work, and this is a shining example of that. So they're going to do most of the talking tonight. I'm going to just share for a couple minutes now, and then we're going to lean into some of the family work and the importance of communication and the healing that takes place with families. And I was talking to Deb and Laura. We were kind of in the locker room prepping, getting ready for the big game, and they kind of said, "How are you?" And I said, I mean, I don't really know, So in my moment of being vulnerable, and then I was walking in, and someone, "Hey, you say you look really good," and I said, "But do I feel good?" And in a moment of being vulnerable, I sit in front of you in a suit, and I flew back. So I'll go back to last night. I walked into an event at Ole Miss University down in Oxford, and I was asked to come speak on mental health and substance abuse, and I had no idea what to expect. And we start to walk over to the event, and we walk into literally their old basketball stadium. I'm like, "How many people are you guys expecting?" And fast forward, over 1,000 men showed up to this talk, which was, it just gave me so much hope and pride about the work that we all do, because 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe even last year, like, that talk isn't being welcomed on that campus, and there sure as hell is not 1,000 guys showing up. It's also the scariest population to speak to, because if you bullshit them, they are going to call you out immediately, and you're going to lose them. So I think I held the room. I think I did my part, and it was a lot, though. It was a lot, because afterwards you end up conversing with a lot of the guys, and then I woke up this morning to a lot of messages from these young guys, and stories of just depression and family members, and I say that because the people in this room that do this work, like, that we get to do this shoulder to shoulder, and maybe I'm just kind of highlighting what we do and some of the stuff that we take on, and sometimes we need a hug. We need a hug, and we are truly just doing the best that we can. So I'm grateful for Laura, I'm grateful for Deb, all the other folks here that work for or affiliated with Release. I'm very grateful for you guys, and I see you, and I acknowledge you, and I know that you really, really try hard. And then, basically I had to, there's no great flights out of Mississippi, so I left the talk, and I was driving back to Nashville to fly home to get here on time for this, and I got pulled over. So I got a speeding ticket. And I would say on the way to Mississippi, this is just my day yesterday, I took the gas thing out and I kept the thing clamped. And I kind of went to look at it, and it was like, I'd never done this before. I don't know how that doesn't have more, but sprayed my entire self with gas. So the car I'm driving in is like, stinks like gas. I go do this talk, everyone's like, the joke is, "You smell like gas, dude." And I'm like, I know, but what am I supposed to do? And then I I got the speeding ticket, got home around 1 o'clock, got on my flight this morning, and landed in Newark. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to show up to this panel tonight. I just had no idea. And I said, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to drive up to Yorktown Heights, and I'm going to go to that track. And I'm going to run laps until I feel better. And I parked my car, and I got out of the car, and I saw some of our clients walking to the gym, which just makes me so happy. It warms my heart to see that on this like bright, sunny April day, to see these guys in early recovery, walking to the gym to move around, which we believe is so key to wellness. Warmed my heart, and then I ran as fast as I could for 8 miles, and I got my car and I drove here, and I threw some deodorant on, and I did not shower, and so I'm sitting in front of you, very vulnerable and ready to talk about family work. And I just do that because, like, I think we've all had these days, right? And sometimes we just need to say it out loud and say, like, that's where I'm at right now. And I give you permission and you permission and you permission to tell me whatever's going on, and I'm still gonna love all of you. So that's my day, and that's my spiel, and that's my little moments of gratitude. So anyway, family work. Why do we care about families? I share this story, and I'm gonna shut up, but I share this story. I took over our family group, which is so much more robust now, thanks to Emma Turkel, I see her on Zoom. But I took over our family group, I don't know, like 2 years ago for about 6 months. And what happens is we get together on these Wednesday nights, and all our families come and we share, and it's very beautiful. And we really, our case managers and the folks that do this work, encourage our families to show up. And every week it was like, we love you, Zach, and we love Steve, and we love Howard, and you have the best team. And I'm like, I think we're good, but I don't know that we're this good. You know, like, it's impossible that we're having positive outcomes with every single case. So I literally got up out of bed and I went to the computer and I started looking at it, and I realized, and it was like it hit me straight between the eyes. The families that were coming, right, and showing up were the families of the clients and the residents that were doing well. So there's this synergy that exists, that like the family really does heal together. And so for us and for clinicians and behavioral healthcare workers, the importance of family work had never been so clear. And from that moment on, we like really committed to doing more for our families. And so I'm just gonna start there for you guys, like the importance of family work, why we do it, like just really 101, based off kind of that story and some of the work you guys have done over the years.
Well, when you tell that story, what comes to mind is like, what is enabling families to do well when everyone's doing their own work, right? Like, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to show up and things are magically going to be better, right? And there's definitely work involved. And so what comes to mind, and why I imagine the families that do their own work, why over time you see massive shifts overall with the individual, the identified patient, and the family. I mean, on the one hand, like, as a parent, if you're going to the recommended family meetings, if you're going to the recommended group meetings, if you're engaging in your own psychotherapy, whether that's like your individual work, couples work, maybe family work with your other family members, you're modeling exactly what you're asking your loved one to be doing. You're telling your loved one, there's been a conversation at some point that said, we need you to get help. We need you to look at some of this stuff. Like, you're not seeing what we're seeing. And so the very act of saying that same thing to yourself and accepting that same recommendation is this really beautiful implicit type of communication, right? That, like, if we're going to ask you to do this, and we're going to ask you to be vulnerable, and we're going to ask you to give up strategies and coping mechanisms that, like, have been so useful for you, I mean, the very least is we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to be on this journey with you, right? And then everyone goes on their own journey, right? Like, you know, your loved one is doing work with their therapist, you're doing work with your therapist, and and everyone's just making the appropriate shifts. And so that when everyone comes together, right, because the work that you're doing in these family groups is probably fairly similar, but also pretty different than like what we might be doing here in terms of psychotherapy, right? So then there's this kind of perfect opportunity for these shifts to occur that when the family comes together, they're all ready to really do the work.
Right. Yeah. So, can you guys hear me? Or no? Oh, good. Okay. I know none to do that. So just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, one of the things that I think is the hardest thing to do for a family is to pick up the phone and say, I need help, and that I don't know how to navigate these waters. This is something that I've never done before. And to be able to reach out to community members who can help you to navigate this, because it's a really daunting experience to have, you know, whether it's a spouse or a child who is struggling, and to not be able to help them and to not know how to help is a really hard thing to admit to yourself, and then to pick up the phone and say, I need someone to help me. And that we all know that there is a giant pool of resources, and how do you know, right, what's the right one, right, if you've never done this before. And to put people around you who can help guide you and help you to navigate this system. But I think to what you were saying, that you know, the healing takes place not just within the identified patient, but it's an entire system that is impacted when a loved one is struggling just with any illness, whether it's mental health, whether it's addiction, whether it's a physical illness. Everybody's impacted by that. So, you know, the foundation being strong enough to handle the weight of a sick member, really, in my mind, is connecting to the family. So it's not surprising what you're saying, that when you see, you know, family members who are engaged in treatment, that the identified patient seems to be healing. So yeah, and there's, you know, we're so blessed in that we have so many resources around us here. But, you know, picking up the phone and asking for help and saying, I don't know how to navigate this. This is beyond anything I've ever done. And it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I love that, and we'll stay with you so we don't have to keep doing the musical mics. But and maybe this is a helpful antidote. I remember when I was in treatment, and you know, I think parents want this immediate, or spouses, or whoever it is that's supporting the identified patient. And for those of you guys that don't know, the identified patient is the person who's in treatment, right? So that's if there's people that are like new. But I was in a treatment center, and every Sunday they had this chapel, and my father, who is kind of like the get down and give me 10 push-ups when I'm not doing the right thing kind of guy, you know, if that makes sense, like figure it out, started showing up. And I never said thank you, I never acknowledged him, but I felt it, right? I felt it. And so while I didn't get that immediate, or he didn't get that immediate feeling of like, oh, my son loves me again, I certainly felt it. And, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So, all right, Deb, so the buzzwords, like I don't laugh, but there's these words in our work, enabler and relapse and trigger and all these words that get tossed around, like, and they're weaponized and they're used against people or they're used for people. And the one that stands out for me the most in families is this word, boundary. So I'm just curious if you could speak to, like, maybe how to shed some light on, like, a positive example of a boundary, or
Absolutely. So I think that, I mean, there's definitely a whole sea, like you said, of these buzzwords that come out, and boundary is definitely one of them. And unfortunately, I think the boundary, that word has gotten a connotation of like a line in the sand and don't cross over. And it has like this negative connotation to it, which in fact, I think of it as the exact opposite. I think that what it does is it sets limits and parameters for everybody in the system who's being affected by the illness. And it really helps to create continuity, there's understanding, there's clarity, there's expectations, right? The boundaries are. And I think that setting them with whoever, you know, I use identified patient, sorry, it's a clinical term, but I use that. But doing that in collaboration with, it does not need to be, I'm setting this boundary, and if you don't listen and adhere to it, there's going to be a consequence. No, it means that we need to come together collectively as a family and relook at what the system is that's not working for us and for you, so we can change that dynamic. But what it does is it really sets a tone for, these are expectations, right? And we're setting them together, right? They're not meant as a punishment. They're meant to give clarity to you and to us. And if we're struggling within that boundary, let's come back collectively and create one that works for us as a system, because it is a family system and it is a unit. This is not I'm going to set you up to fail. It's let's set you up to be successful. And what are some of these things that we can put around you to support you? So when I hear boundary, that's usually what I'm looking for.
So it's almost like a collective effort. Like, is that what I'm hearing? You're giving the patient and the family some say in this collective decision, so it doesn't feel like it's the family saying this or.
Yes, or setting somebody up to, well, I didn't know that. You didn't tell me that you would have wanted me to be home at a certain time. Let's sit down and what does this look like? Well, that's not a realistic expectation. I'm not going to be able to be home every night at 10 o'clock because mom wants to go to bed, or, right? Like, that's unrealistic. I go to a meeting and then we go out to eat or something like that. That's not realistic. Well, now that we're talking about this, I know you're not going to be in until 11, so I'm okay with that. And now you're setting somebody up to be successful. So I see boundaries as something that are set up to set limits around success for an individual and for their family. So it's unfortunate that it's gotten a bit of a bad rap, but you can put a twist on it, and it's very helpful. At least I found it to be with my crew. What about you?
Sweet.
What about you over there?
Yeah, boundaries. So for me, it always goes back to childhood, right? Anyone that's heard me speak and has, engaged with me in any capacity knows that everything kind of goes back to childhood age. And think about when you have a young kid, right? Like, kids crave boundaries. They don't understand how to navigate the world. They need mom and dad who have regulated nervous systems and a fully functioning prefrontal cortex to illustrate and model what is okay and what is not. And when you have a loved one who has mental health or substance use, these capacities, the ability to regulate, the ability to make rational and good decisions from a pragmatic place, are often not fully online. And so boundaries, I think of boundaries as some of the most compassionate and loving things a parent can provide their loved one. And I say parent, right? But it could be a spouse, it could be a sibling, right? What you're really doing is you're really seeing that person for what they need. And if you're really seeing someone, right, you're really seeing someone for where they are in their process and where they are in their lives, what's happening is you're allowing your own projections, that's a clinical term as well, your own projections, your own beliefs about where my loved one should be in this moment, you're actually allowing that to settle. And you're seeing your loved one for where they are, not where you want them to be, not where you wish they would be, and not where you think they should be after months and months of treatment, where they actually are. And you're saying they need more. So to me, a boundary is like, it's seeing, it's compassionate, and it's really like self-care for yourself, right? When I set a boundary, when I say no, I'm really tuning into what I need, and I'm feeling comfortable and I'm feeling assured to be able to say that. Knowing that the person who's receiving this boundary may or may not accept it, but I'm taking care of myself. So, this very simple word, which can be very evocative, to me it's really multifaceted, and it's a really important concept to really understand within yourself and within this sort of context that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I think we do ourselves a disservice at times in this work when we start to throw these words around. They're loaded, and we don't take the time to step back and say, like, okay, what does this really mean? You know, like, what are we actually talking about here? And I'm not a therapist, but I've learned some of the language over the years, and it's been so inspiring to me. It's like, hey, I understand that you need $20. I can't give you that $20 because it's not healthy for me, but I still love you and I'll support you in whatever ways that I can. You know, and it's like different than saying like, you asking for $20 every day. You know, like or like the confrontation. So, but we're gonna dig deeper into a boundary because the main question that I feel like I get when we first engage a family on the front end, who has so this is specific to maybe the adolescent or the young adult population that has someone who's active in their substance use disorder and it's not getting any better, we will get to a point in the conversation where mom or dad says to me, do I need to kick him out of the house? Do I need to put him on the street? And I think the answer to this question has evolved over the years. I think 20 years ago, a lot of people were being kicked out to the street with no language around it. So I'll start with Laura and just kind of for both of you, is there ever a time to kick someone out on the street? And yeah, let's dig in.
Well, I think every case is nuanced, right? Every case is different. I think there's a reframe in there for a parent that's coming to a helping professional and asking that kind of direct question. It's very jarring. I think even as you were saying it, I felt something. So the reframe would be, you're never. I mean, I imagine in most cases you're never actually kicking someone out. That there's been options that you are providing them, right? It's like it's either take this option or you're on the street kind of thing, right? And so maybe the reframe is really focusing on like what it is you are offering this person, right? You're offering them help. You're saying, we can't accept the status quo as is. We love you, and we're going to support you, but we're not going to support this. And what we will support unconditionally is your choice to get help. And here are your choices. And there's agency in that, right? Which can be very scary for people to have agency over their own lives, right? Especially younger, adolescents who don't have much agency, or they're just developing their own agency, and young adults that have substance use and substance use and mental health issues. There is a lack of agency online. So that intervention where you're kind of laying the options out provides an opportunity for your loved one to exercise some agency. And again, it's nuanced. I had children. I understand like how fraught the idea of like, if you don't take this option, you're going to live on the street is in practicality. But the reframe for yourself as the parent or as the loved one that is initiating this boundary is, what are you really offering them? You are offering them an opportunity. You are offering them help. You are saying we love you. You are seeing them, right? And you're saying this is what we can accept moving forward. We can't accept this anymore the way it's been going. And it might take several times with a personal therapist, a family therapist, a coach to really get to this point, because you go into that conversation knowing that they can, if you're giving them the opportunity to exercise agency and you're giving them choice, they could choose the option that you don't want them to choose. And so there's a lot of work leading up to that, of course. But then you think, oh, what's the alternative? We just keep accepting what's happening, and then we know what the potential outcome is in that sense, right? It's always the worst case scenario. So, not an easy situation, nuanced and challenging, but that would be the beginning of the conversation that I would have with whomever was asking me this question.
Yeah, I mean, thank you.
I feel very similarly. I mean, it's it really has to be kind of a case by case basis to make a decision like that. But it's also, when it gets to that, it's taken months and years to progress to the point of I'm feeling so helpless. I don't know what else to do, and that I'm almost at the point that I'm turning to something that I never thought as a family member I would ever say to and as a parent that I would ever say to my child is, you have to leave. But, there's the other part of this, which is also for the families who are going through this, that they have their breaking points also, right? And to see, when families come in and they're struggling like this, that they get to a point of, I feel like I have no other option, right? And to help create options. And yes, sometimes and I say this, it's horrible, but the option is not great and pretty bad, right? But there's still options. And, then the client has to make their decision. And, we hope that it's not to leave with no plan. But there's always in the back of, you can come back here and we have a plan if you're ready to accept that. But it's not going to be on your terms where we're continuing to do this and it's not working, right? So having, the supports around those kinds of decisions, in that looking at, in psychiatry we look at, right, the risks, the benefits, and the alternatives, and we put all of those in place before you make a decision like that. Like, what are the other options that we have before coming into a decision of, you need to leave the house. That's a really, really tough decision for any family member and any parent to have to make. But it's a question that, we see all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into the next question, which we were in the back, and you're like, guilt and shame. Write that down, Zach. Like, guilt and shame, family. I need to talk about that, and that's where I have a lot of compassion. I don't have kids. I've never been asked to put my child on the street. I've never, been living with an active substance user, so I don't know what that feels like. And a lot of times, as a professional, it's a major decision, because you're trying to guide the family to the best of your ability, and we're not dealing with like the college that they're going to get into. We're dealing with truly, life or death. And I even think now with the marijuana and the way that it's affecting the brain, like even those cases need to be looked at with a little sharper lens, because a 19-year-old might not overdose from marijuana, but he might fry his brain, and that's just as scary. Like being a walking shell themselves. So, can you talk a little bit about the guilt and the shame that families feel, and then maybe swing that into some hope and where you've seen some real
Yeah, sure.
positive outcomes?
Well, I wanted you to touch on the guilt and the shame because it's something that comes up and you can see it, like in the family's face of, what did I do wrong? How did we get here? Did I not love them enough? Did I not help them enough? Did I not nurture them? Were they not? I mean, like all the questions that come through, and there is so much guilt and so much shame on everybody's part, honestly, right? On the client who is sick is feeling horribly guilty that they're putting their parents and their loved one through this. And, why can't I just stop, right? I see the pain that I'm causing my loved one. It's horrible, right? And then also for family members who have these thoughts that are running through their heads. And it's always interesting to see spouses, like the husband and wife and the parents, who come in and they have these thoughts, but they don't want to say them out loud because they feel so horrible that they've had these thoughts of, I think I'm at the point where I need him to leave, or I need her to leave, or I think I'm ready to get divorced. I can't do this anymore. But they don't want to say it out loud because they don't know if their spouse or their other family member has gotten to that point, and then they feel guilty. So they're shameful for having the thought and guilty for saying. I mean, it's just it's terrible. But just being able to be in an environment where you're validated and that it's all okay to talk about all of it, right? Everybody's going through their own process as they have family members that are struggling and suffering, and it's okay to talk about them because you're all going through it. It's when you're alone, right? And you can have somebody, I said this to a client today, you can have a spouse who's there and sleeping every night in bed with you and feels so incredibly lonely, almost more lonely than if they weren't there, because there's somebody there and they're just not tangible, they're not touchable physically, emotionally, mentally, right? It's almost harder that way. And so to be able to kind of put it all out on the table, and I think that that's one of the things that, you know, we hope as therapists that we can do is create an environment where you can talk about all those things that you're shameful that you're even thinking, and then validated by, wait a minute, I was thinking that too, I just didn't want to say it, right? And it's okay. It's not okay to be in it by yourself, right? It's not okay to have those thoughts and feelings alone, because it's terrifying. But when you talk about it and you let go of the shame and you let go of the guilt, and there's normalizing of it and validating of it, all of a sudden there's this clarity that comes over the room and the conversation. And now we're having a real conversation about, you know, somebody that, you know, you as a family you love and you're watching them suffer, but now we have truth. And in that truth I've found is where my patients heal and their families heal. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy to me. Like the I think what's the name of it? Clear communication, strong families through clear communication. Like I think we all need to acknowledge the fact that communication is hard, regardless of whether there's a substance use disorder or a mental health diagnosis present. Like communication is just hard with employees, with in relationships. I mean, I I always talk about my family and I'm very open about it, and I've gotten all their permission to kind of share some of our little, you know, Clark family things. But I'm 40 years old now, and my mom was recently sick and she's healthy again, but it was very interesting watching the communication there, because my mother still wanted to protect me. She did not want to tell me she was sick. She did not want to tell the family. She was going to hold it close. And she was like, in her mind, I think she was actually going to magically get cured and not have to tell anyone. I had this, like, I sat my parents down, because what ends up happening is my 82-year-old dad sends a text message, is like, kids, mom, you know, and it's like, what the hell am I reading? And then that creates this chaos of like, I'm calling mom and calling brother and sister. Did you know this? I didn't know this. And it's like, all it would have taken is like a little bit of clear communication, right? And so like when we talk about guilt and shame and some of the things you just talked about, I just think there's so much value in just being clear, you know, and using the tools. Laura, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I could talk about shame for a while.
Let's do it.
Well, so like, why is shame so hard to talk about, right? So shame is hard to talk about because shame has to do with your identity. Shame is I'm bad. Guilt is I did something bad. And they often, there's like a lot of conflation, right? So being an individual who's suffering from substance use or addiction, mental health, or being a parent. So when parents come into therapy, right, or a spouse comes into therapy, you know, again, I'm going to talk about like projections and lenses again. You're coming in with this maybe very conscious or unconscious belief that like I failed, that like this is because of me. And now again, you may be really in touch with that, or you may be really not in touch with that. And as we know, the unconscious can really still drive a lot of our behaviors and how we are and how we interact. So even if we're not in touch with it, it's still very present for us. So shame is so challenging to work with because it feels like it's the truth. If I'm walking around feeling so identified with this feeling of badness, this feeling of, defectiveness, that's intense, right? And so oftentimes people don't get go into treatment. Parents don't get the help that they need because it's somehow going to mean that their worst fears are realized, that I am bad, that I failed. And they're really kind of like counterintuitive thing. And you learn this if you go into a 12-step program. So anyone who's ever done Al-Anon, anyone who's ever done NA or AA or anything similar, that feeling you get when you go to a meeting maybe willing for the first time. And that shame reduction when you hear other people's stories and you hear other things that sound really similar to you. You're like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. And people we walk around thinking like, there's something wrong with me. I am bad, I am wrong, I am undeserving. So I did not uncover this, right? This was, there's I'm sure most of you all know who Brene Brown is, right? She's a researcher, she's a social worker researcher. She researches shame. And there's a great video called The Power of Vulnerability. It's really incredible. We played it for the guys here. I've played it for like adolescent boys and like, it, for the most part hits, so I think that says a lot. But she says that the antidote to shame is vulnerability. So when we kind of lean into these things that are so scary for us to tap into and we're vulnerable, right? And here's the modeling piece coming in, like I'm being vulnerable as a parent in the presence of my child and they're seeing it and we're connecting, it's a right brain connection there. I'm leaning into this thing that feels so scary to me. And what's actually happening is the world's not ending. My worst fears aren't coming to fruition. I'm actually feeling better. And like there's a weight that's now being lifted. So shame and guilt are huge barriers. And when we overcome them, we actually feel like, oh wait, this is what I need to be leaning into. Is these things that I don't want to look at, that are really, really scary. And the reality is, even if I'm not looking at it, even if it's buried deep into my unconscious, it's still guiding me. So there's really no avoiding it. And that's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very clear. We get way more resistance from the families going to support groups or 12-step meetings or whatever we point them to than the patients and the clients that we serve. Because of, what if I walk in there and I see my neighbor? Well, then you have something in common. That's amazing. God forbid, right? Like you walk into a room and you see someone you know and it's like, oh my God, like I know someone here. But we're so terrified that someone's going to find out that my son or husband or wife is an alcoholic, right? But the flip side of that and the reframe is like, how cool is that? That you're actually willing to make change. You're actually willing to step outside of your comfort zone. You're actually willing to like confront this shame head on. And a lot of what I heard Laura talking about there is like this whole idea of community. Like we can sit up here and chat and you can have the best therapist in the world and a great psychiatrist and read all the books. But at the end of the day, like that human to human connection, that shoulder to shoulder, that like, in AA, they say like one alcoholic sharing with another, like that is very, very valuable. And it's something I talked about last night with the student body because these college campuses are all seeing their counseling centers overrun. There's just the demand is far greater than the supply. And so I said, guys, like this, good news, bad news, like it falls back on you. And you need to support one another in this journey. And that's when they kind of like perked up and they took like this brotherly love, go Philly approach to it. And so I appreciate that because like, I think especially Purchase and Westchester, and I grew up in Haddonfield, New Jersey, and it's like, no one can know. No one can know. But chances are there's more commonality than we understand.
It's so much more.
Yeah, go ahead,
so
please.
Much more. I mean, I've been doing this in Westchester since 2000.
25 years. Come on, give it up.
But it was never, and I say this all the time, it has never been more acceptable than it is now to get help for substance use disorders or mental health treatment. It's almost like, and I don't mean to minimize it, trust me, but it's almost like, if people aren't having sugar and dairy and milk and they're not doing all of these things and all of a sudden they lose weight, they look great, they're not inflamed, they're taking ice cold plunges and all of this, it's like the next trick. Like, it has never been more acceptable to say, you know what, I just decided to clean it up and I cut alcohol out and I feel great and I'm just keeping on going. Right? And all of a sudden when people say that, the next thing out of my client's mouth is they wanted to know how I did it. And my response is, don't tell them about it. Not about me. Tell them what you did. But and now there is a community around here, and thanks to Release for creating such a beautiful center for us to use. But there is such a strong community of recovery and mental health treatment here that my clients are finding exactly what you just said, which is I go in and I see somebody from the golf club, or I see somebody from the gym, or I see somebody who I met here, and all of a sudden you have one person that you're talking to about this, and that's how it spreads and it normalizes that it's okay to be human, right? We all have things about us that we're working on, and all of a sudden this normalizes it, but it's that first time of exposure and vulnerability that is so, so challenging, and I get that. But the feedback and the get back that you get from that exposure and vulnerability is tenfold. And that's been the experience that I've seen.
So something came up, and I'm going to ask you to keep the mic, and I think it's helpful for spouses and parents and siblings. It's like this whole idea of how do you tell their story, and I know for me, like, it's something that, like, my mom would call and my dad would call, like, hey, I'm going to dinner tonight, like, how do you want me to I'm like, I don't know, tell them I took a break from work, or like, and it was always a hard thing for me to answer, and it made me feel stigmatized, and it made me feel less than, because they have to go out to a dinner and I've caused all this harm, and now they have to go, have a swirl of Chardonnay and explain to their friends where Zach's been,
Right.
And like, I think it's just a good thing to kind of talk on, and maybe how you,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that, it is. We live in the land here of like perfectionism, right? Like nobody's got anything that's going on. And meanwhile, as soon as you say, somebody was struggling, next thing you know, well, because I got this one who was struggling and that one who's struggling, and now all of a sudden you have truth and honesty. So what I have found is helpful is you do not need to go into a dinner with your friends and say, Zach's in Florida and he's going to be there for 60 to 90 days. No, but Zach decided he is doing something for himself, and he is taking some time away from work to work on his own healing and and it doesn't have to be buzzwords of recovery and AA and, alcoholism. I mean, I say this all the time. I've been doing this for, like Zach said, a long time. I do not treat an alcoholic or an addict or this. I treat somebody's son, I treat somebody's husband, I treat a family member. And when it's taken out of the context of this stereotypical language, it turns into a completely different lens, which is my son is empowering himself to take time away from his life that was not working for him to find a path that works better for him. And now all of a sudden you have these proud parents who have raised this person who is prioritizing their physical and mental health, as opposed to this language that has this connotation because of the land we live in that something is wrong. Something is not wrong, something is so right. Something is so right. And it has so much to do with the lens that we look at it through and the language that we use around it. Right?
I love that answer. So, Laura, you're going to be swift here, and I'm going to ask one more, and then I'm going to give you guys a shot. If you guys have questions, get them ready, because we're going to save about 5 or 10 minutes for questions from the audience. But something that fascinates me in our work is, God forbid the person gets well. They're 6 months sober, they're 9 months sober, they're a year sober, but the family stays stuck, and they're almost addicted to the chaos, and they're, what should I do with the alcohol in the house? And he told me he's going on a date. Do we like the girl? Or like, like this incessant need to kind of know everything and micromanage their lives, because there is an element when I am struggling that my mom has some control and my dad has some control over my life, because I can't actually function. So they're financially responsible for some stuff, and they have a watch on me, and they can track my location because I like need them, right? And then that stuff goes away when people start to heal, and the family's left like, wait, what am I supposed to do? And so I think that would be a helpful thing to talk about for families in this room, that like, oh, the person's actually getting well. Does that mean I need to kind of like move on and maybe find a hobby?
Yeah, I mean, this makes me think, I know these panels aren't necessarily series, but this is a lot of what we talked about in February, in the last panel, where when we understand, if, the family system, right? There's like any system, like any kind of biological system, it's always reaching for homeostasis, right? So an under-functioning member is going to be, another member of the family is going to compensate by over-functioning, right? And so that's where these terms that are terrible, right? The labels like enabler, codependent, and but really, like I like the term like over-functioning, right? Like there's a member that's over-functioning for another member that's under-functioning, right? And so when that member that is under-functioning goes to treatment and gets better, right? The family member that's been over-functioning may have all this sort of like energy, or a lot of even like identity really invested in like their role. And then it's like, well, what do I do now? Right? And so, I mean, the simplest answer is that's why you do your own work. That's why there has to be a parallel process. There has to be in engagement from all members, right? And if there's siblings involved, there should be siblings, and as long as they're old enough and they have good therapeutic support, right? Because we talked about this with the golden child, right? I'm not the under-functioning member of the family, but I don't want to add any stress to my parents. I visibly am aware of how stressed out my parents are. So I, as the golden child, will now shut down all of my needs. I'm not going to ask for anything, and I'm not going to make a big deal out of anything. Because I don't want to add the stress. My parents are so stressed out, I don't want to add to it, right? And so all that stuff actually comes to the surface, which, again, just highlights the need for everyone just doing their own work. And with that, there's nothing bad about being an over-functioning parent. There's nothing bad about it. It's these labels are, they're confining and they can feel stigmatizing. But this is just what it is. This is just what happens in systems.
It's interesting to watch when a family member starts getting better, because the other members of the family for so long have been in this caretaking role that it's almost like they decompensate a little bit, because like their loved one is doing really well, and so, well, can I trust it? Like, can I go away in a month? Like, is this gonna poof and magically disappear? And the answer is, if it's being done properly, yes, you can go away in a month, right? If your loved one is doing what it is they need to do for themselves to get well and stay well, yes, you should be able to go away. Now, well, what does that look like? And it's we take a step back and look at it as, they haven't been able to do this in so long. There is going to be fear and anxiety in leaving a loved one that you haven't left in a long time, and the guilt of, well, what happens if something happens? And the answer is, you don't live in the what if. You just can't live in what if. You have to live in the here and the now and the present. And you have to set up systems around yourself, like Laura was just saying. You have to set up systems around yourself and around your loved one, so that way they can learn to take care of themselves, because the goal is self-empowerment, right? So it's a great question.
Yeah, and this stuff's easier said than done, guys. I mean, it really is. I have so much compassion for you, and the language. I mean, we've been in this stuff for a long time, and so it's gonna be. I just want to like give you permission to be curious and take baby steps. Like you're gonna like get some reps in, practice it out. Like communicate with your loved ones and see. Oh, that felt good. Like that felt a little better. Like I'm not walking away from this conversation resentful. Like I was really able to own my side of it. And I'm gonna go to questions, but there's this set of parents, and you might be from, so Turnbridge is a treatment center, and Lauren Springer runs their family program. So Jay and Lauren Springer I've known about forever, and they should be in the Hall of Fame of like parents because they started support groups and this whole thing. But their story, and they don't mind me sharing this, is that their son basically went to like treatment 25 times. Like 25 times. They could not get this kid sober, and they started like I was on the board of a treatment center with Jay. I'm like, Jay, like, but your kid's like out there. He's like, yeah, the treatment center didn't save Greg's life. They saved mine. And that was like really powerful because they leaned in and they did the work. And how most of these stories go, it was like Greg's now sober and like the family's back together, and it took a really long time, but Jay and Lauren chose to like be okay whether or not their son was okay, and that's a really powerful place to get to, but should be the goal for all of you. We have like 5-7 minutes. Questions? Don't be shy. We definitely did not cover it all. I promise you that. Yeah.
What do you recommend in terms of parents finding a community where they can have this initiative? Is it Al-Anon? Is it private psychiatry? Probably different people. How do you get started?
We host this really great Wednesday night family support group that I know both of you, and you're welcome to be there. So that's a good start. And I'll pass to Deb for.
I think that Al-Anon, I refer my clients to Al-Anon. And you have to go to a bunch of different groups at a bunch of different times. You just have to keep going to find some of your own kind of people that you connect with. And I say that with AA also, right? You're going to get a different crowd when you're going, at 7:30 in the morning, then 12:30 in the afternoon, then 7 o'clock at night, right? Like you have to go and just keep talking and meeting people, and you'll find 1 or 2 people that you click with. And those people may have been there for a bit longer than you, and they have 1 or 2 people that they've clicked with. And next thing you know, you start developing, your own community. But having that community is invaluable, right? For families, they need to have support. This disease thrives on isolation, right? The disease of addiction thrives on isolation. So the kryptonite's connection, right? And that doesn't just happen for the client who's struggling. That happens for the family too. There's no way that a family is going to be able to figure out how to navigate this on their own. They're just not. And seeing a therapist 5 days a week is not going to be the answer to that either, because I love that too. Well, I'll just come and see you more. I will never be a room full of recovering parents or recovering, I just won't be. So yes, put yourself in environments where you can meet a bunch of different people and families that are going through it. There's a lot of online stuff too. I'm not opposed to that. Right?
And I think we have a duty to serve you as well. And so like this event is great, but it feels very serious. We got a couple chuckles here and there, but it is. We're talking about serious stuff, and so like my team knows me. Like my mind is always going, and I'm thinking like, all right, the next time we do one of these things, we should have a potluck, and there should be like a real like sit down, and we can create community right here. Like we have it in front of us, and it wouldn't be hard for us to send an email out and say. That's like what they do in AA. Okay, service position. Who's gonna greet? And then the food would probably be better than what we threw down out there, and we'd probably have a great time. So maybe you gave me an idea or us an idea to kind of really build it right here.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi.
You talked a little bit about, when your son, daughter, whatever is getting better and letting go. But, I mean, to, talk in a little bit more depth, is boundaries one of the words that you might want to use and create some kind of boundaries going forward? Because,
As they're getting
you
well.
can't just let go.
No,
all
but
at once.
have that conversation, right? Have the conversation of I'm struggling with, I want to let go, but I'm afraid to let go. And what would be helpful, right? Like, what are some things that you might find to be soothing as you go through your process of recovery, also, right? And have that conversation, right? You don't want to project your feelings onto your loved one, but at the same time, you've been living, or my families have been living with so much anxiety related to this, and as they get better, the anxiety doesn't just dissipate. So being able to have the conversation of, this might be helpful for me for now, and then revisit it. I say this all the time, like, having a conversation around the kitchen table and I tell everyone to set the microwave because nobody wants to have them for long periods of time, but a 10-minute chat of where are you at, how are you doing, and then you go back and revisit it. From where we left last time, what have I been doing that's been helpful, and what have I been doing that's getting in the way, right? How can I help? And that goes both ways, right? It's not just for the client, right? It's also for their families also. So communication is key to this.
And not making assumptions, right? Like I always talk about, there was this moment in time with my family where I was about 7 or 8 months sober, and I was coming home, and I don't know if it was for Thanksgiving or Christmas or one of the holidays, and my mom literally just sat me down. She said, "Hey, do I have permission to ask you a question?" And the way that she kind of approached it was so kind, and I was like, "Yeah, what's up, Mom?" And it level set immediately. She goes, "I'm hearing a bunch of different stuff about like whether or not we should or shouldn't have alcohol at the holiday, so I figured like I just ask you because that felt like the right thing to do." And I think the assumption is that like most people like don't have alcohol, it's gonna trigger me. I was like, it's totally cool. It'd actually be super weird if you guys weren't drinking. Like you drank for the last 25 holidays. So like for you to like that almost like if I was gonna feel like more eyes were on me if people weren't drinking and that I was ruining other people's holidays. So the assumption that like, and then I have met people that say like, yeah, I would really appreciate it if you guys like stood in solidarity with me and didn't drink. Right? So again, it's like it's not making assumptions, it's communication, it's all that stuff. So we have to wrap. I want to thank Scott. I want to thank Rick. I want to thank, if you work at Release, can you put your hand up? Thank you. A couple things, just I have to do a little like plug action. I did just start. So I started a podcast, and the reason I started this podcast is because I have been gifted, if you know a little bit about my story, kind of this like platform, if you call it, and I get many messages and DMs that are nearly impossible to keep up with on social media. And so the purpose of that platform is to hopefully have people like Deb and Laura and psychiatrists and professionals on to have conversations like this that will live somewhere, and really be helpful, and give you guys some hope and provide some solutions, because I actually kind of believe that a lot of the, excuse my language, shit we see out there on social media isn't really based in solution. It's kind of like we highlight the problem and then we don't do anything about it. So we'll send an email or we'll get some information about that, and it's like, it doesn't matter to me if you listen or not, but I feel like it is going to have some useful chats and talks. And the second thing is, when you talk about community and all that stuff, we do these runs down in Central Park every Monday night, and that is not just for people who are struggling with a substance use disorder. It's open to everyone. There's walks, we hang out, it's super fun, and like you're all welcome to hang out there. Like we'll get 80, 90, 100 people. It's a total mass collection of just like people that want to hang out, and so that's a great opportunity, and some services available to you there. But half the battle with all this stuff is just really showing up, so showing up. And we did that tonight. I don't think there's any more questions. And if there's not, we can wrap it and clap it, you know what I mean? Right? Oh, and I gotta Deb, thank you one more time for coming. I get to see Laura laugh. We will make sure that I will do the plug for her, and she's probably already filled to the brim with busyness. But we will make sure you have her information, even in the event that you ever need her services. Or we do want to highlight the beautiful work she's done in this community. I can't imagine the impact that she has had on so many families. And with that, I am going to go to bed.